My name is Jack Ryan, and I'm a second-year Master of Public Policy student at the McCourt School of Public Policy. I'm currently the president of the McCourt Student Association, which gives McCourt students a platform to amplify their needs and concerns through advocacy and action. I've also previously served as a student strategy team lead through GU Politics in the spring 2019 semester. I'm honored today to introduce Congressman Tim Ryan. Congressman Ryan's political career began in 1995 as congressional aide in the United States House of Representatives. He served as a member of the Ohio State Senate for 2 years before his election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2002, where he continues to represent Ohio's 13th congressional district, now serving in his 9th term. He is a member of the House Appropriations Committee and serves as co-chairman of the Congressional Manufacturing Caucus. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Tim Ryan to the stage.
Nice job, Congressman. Thank you. My cousin Jack.
Yeah, no kidding.
Good job.
Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I don't know if you guys saw Chris Hayes talking to Bernie Sanders, and they stood the whole time, but he makes me look too small, so we're going to sit. So listen, after we're almost halfway through this, and so we've been talking to various candidates for a long time, and you get through a lot of detail, and I think the viewers want to know why all the Democratic candidates and Bill Weld, who's here, are all on the right side of understanding that climate change is a thing, it's serious, it's probably their #1 issue. But the perspective that you bring to the conversation is always a little bit different. And in your case, because of where you're from and the things that you focus on, jobs and manufacturing are central to the way you look at this issue.
Yeah.
So I want you to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, our kids are the reason that that the urgency is there. Mason's 16. Bella's 15, Brady's 5.
So they're fully going to live this experience.
Bella bought us these bracelets, these 4 ocean bracelets, 2 weeks ago, because she's thinking about it. And
so in fact, before answering my first question, let's just talk about that. When they think about it, that helps you think about it. What is their worry? What is your worry about the world if we continue on this track?
Well, it starts with the straws and the sea turtles, for Bella, which is like that started. Why is this happening? And then it became, as you grow, as you're young, it starts with something like that. And then it became, why is all this garbage in the ocean? And so then it became the bracelet. And she's just growing and evolving in her understanding of what's happening there. And so for me to watch that happen, which is as a parent, and all your parents see this in you, you start seeing the world through your kids' eyes, and you're watching them grow. And to me, that was like, oh shit, I better get busy here because this is really, not going in the right direction. Right. And so it gives you a sense of urgency of why you run for president.
So these students really have helped the argument, because to them, they have said, all of your other plans and all of your other neat policies are good, but if the earth burns, floods, and dies, none of it matters.
And so to weave in your original question, for me, I'm 46. We have 3 kids. I come from a manufacturing area. I come from Northeast Ohio. I'm halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. It used to be the steel capital of the world. I represent Akron. Used to be the rubber capital of the world. And we come from an area that builds things. Yep. And so I've always thought, politically, how do you start to weave all these things together? So really over the course of the next hour, the one general theme I want is 2 things, I guess. Let's get away from the left and right conversation, and let's get into the new and better conversation, because the left-right dynamic is totally broken. And then the other theme, I think, is interconnectedness. How do you take an issue like climate and you talk about manufacturing? So back in 2009, we passed the climate bill in the House of Representatives, cap and trade bill.
Yep.
Got destroyed in the 2010 election. I was going back home to Youngstown and Akron talking about how this is a bill about manufacturing. Guys, we're going from fossil fuels to a windmill with 8,000 component parts, solar panels, electric vehicles, and like what the future would be. We build that stuff. So I was just like, guys, this is where we want to be. This is, you want to talk about manufacturing, you want to talk about making things, you want to talk about bringing American jobs back. This is the greatest opportunity we have. And so framing it in that way, so I feel I bring an interesting perspective because I have the urgency of the youth, because I'm fairly young, I'm not old yet, and the kids, but where I'm from and how I grew up.
And there's an urgency to where you're from too, because you have seen the decimation of a workforce over time and the struggles to try and rebuild that. So that is urgent, because that hasn't gone away. Even though most of the damage to that part of the country was done some years ago, it has not returned to the level of prosperity that it once had while America was building its infrastructure.
Right, not even close, and no response from the government, no adequate response for these communities that used to have steel and rubber and all of these things. Now it's auto. We lost the General Motors plant in the last few months that used to have 16,000 people. Now, then it had 4, now it has 0. And so that just destroys your community. And what I don't blame Trump for every problem, because he didn't create every problem. I do blame him for not having a sense of urgency or an industrial policy built around the green economy that will bring jobs into that factory.
So this is earlier a couple of candidates have mentioned FDR sort of rallying the country around the war effort and rallying the automakers around the idea that you're going to have to stop making cars and you have to make planes and tanks and ships. In a way, if we really think about this as a shift in our economy, as an infrastructural shift, that brings new value to decimated communities or communities that have not recovered across this country. That's the argument you're making.
Huge opportunity, both in older industrial communities and in rural America. I've been talking a lot about regenerative agriculture. I wrote a book about food about 5 years ago called The Real Food Revolution, which you can get at Amazon.com if you want. Makes for a great gift, just so you know. And so there's opportunities here for both. And what I would like to see us do is really align financial incentives with the environmental incentives. There are investors out there, Full Cycle and others, who pick out technologies that will transform the environment. They're going to make money, but once you get profit motive aligned, and I think this is where America can be very valuable in the global attempt to reverse climate change, not kind of stabilize it, but reverse it, is if people can start making money off this stuff. If there's a profit motive, it's going to go a hell of a lot faster than if we're trying to run it from down the street. I mean, we can't even keep the government open. I just voted 20 minutes ago, half hour ago. Continuing resolution, keep the government open until November. How many times have we said government's going to shut down, government's not going to pay its debts, and we're going to put the government...
Businesses don't typically run that way.
No. And so my point is, like, how do we, government does what it's supposed to do, creates the framework, but if we can start steering the incentives for aligning those financial incentives with the environmental incentives, we can transform this thing within the time frame we need to.
One of the problems we have, though, is that it's not a level playing field right now. There are advantages provided by the federal government and state governments to the fossil fuel industry that do not let these entrepreneurs, these businesses that want to invest in new technologies, they're spinning in the wind.
Yeah.
We need to change that.
That's the government piece. I mean, those policies need to change. And obviously we have to do it, and this forum and the pressure from Sunrise and the relationship that was just built between Sunrise and the ranchers and the farmers that they announced yesterday. That's how you move forward. And I would just say we've got to move forward with things that can pass, that things that we can get done that have Democrat and Republican support. I think the last thing any of us want is for Tim Ryan's the president, we have a Democratic Senate, Democratic House, we pass something for 2 years and the Republicans come in and completely undo it. Now we're 2 years behind, as opposed to saying, okay, what are the things we can move on? That's why I think electric vehicles, building things, solar, wind, these are industries that are growing significantly. Solar's growing at 25% a year, wind's growing at 16% a year. I've seen millions of different estimates on electric vehicles, anywhere from like 10 or 20 million in the next 10 years to 120 million around the world in the next 10 years. How do we build those things? And the batteries and the charging stations. The charging stations alone for electric vehicles is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. Right. So let's get on it. So how do we, one of the first things I want to do is have a chief manufacturing officer that would report directly to me. And their job would be, how do you coordinate the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, venture capital, emerging electric vehicle companies, the big three? How do we sit down, use the tax code, maybe opportunity zones, whatever the case may be, and just drive the domination of the electric vehicle market, which China dominates now 50 to 60% of it. How do we do that for batteries? How do we do that for solar, for wind, for the charging stations, and have a policy where we're just driving this and then steering through incentives the investment into the Youngstown, Ohios of the world, the Gary, Indianas of the world, the old textile communities in the Carolinas. How do we get that growth in those communities? Regenerative agriculture, same thing. These are the only farmers making money right now. I don't know how much you guys know about regenerative agriculture, but it sequesters carbon, and they reduce. It
literally takes carbon out of the air and it'll store it.
Yeah, they don't till the soil, and so they plant crops on the soil as much as they possibly can throughout the year, and so carbon suck stays in the ground. And over the years, I was just talking to Will Harris, who was part of this Sunrise group. He was telling me about his farm has sequestered, I can't remember how many, 100 million tons of carbon. I can't remember the number. I can't remember. I don't want to get in trouble, but it was a lot of carbon that he sequestered in his farm over the last 20 years. And you build organic matter into the soil. And so for every 1% increase in organic matter for an acre of land, it holds an inch of water, which is like 25,000 gallons of water. And reduced pesticide use, all the fertilizer that causes algae blooms, goes down to the mouth of the Mississippi and creates a dead zone that kills 220,000 metric tons of fish a year. And there reportedly is 200 plus of those dead zones around the world. That's what our industrial agriculture is doing. Or we can switch to sequestering carbon, profitability for farmers, they're actually making money, get rid of the algae blooms because they don't need as much fertilizer, and then you have soil that can actually hold water for when you need it for droughts, which we're going to need, and it also prevents flooding. So you look at the Central Plains, look at the flooding we've had over the last however many months. Why? Because the soil's like that. It's like hardwood. And so you lay it with fertilizer, nitrogen, water comes, pushes it off, goes into the river, goes down the Mississippi. We've got algae blooms everywhere, and our environments are wrecked.
So you talked about a chief manufacturing officer, but this is an interesting problem because not only is this a good idea, but agriculture itself in America is responsible for almost a quarter of our CO2 output. How does Tim Ryan as president, as opposed to Tim Ryan with a good idea or who's seen a good idea, how does that happen? What happens to bring all these things to the forefront and make them national priorities?
Well, it's use the bully pulpit, the power of the presidency, but you have to, it's like a team. You're a good coach, but you need a good quarterback. You need Baker Mayfield. Not that I'm a Browns fan or anything, but you get people in place that can just drive the agenda. Who's your Secretary of Agriculture? Who's your Secretary of Transportation? Who's your Secretary of Energy? And you make sure you have a team in place that I will set the agenda based on how we move from where we are now to where we want to be. And I think we can transform the country. And again, what I'd like to see in rural America too is these regenerative farms, they become profitable within a year. So we could start to dramatically reduce the subsidies that we're paying that go largely to the top farmers and start reinvesting that money into, this is interconnectedness here, start reducing that money for subsidies, start investing that money back in rural America. Broadband, downtowns, quality of life, cleaning up the rivers, renovating the theaters, creating a sense of place in the downtown and a quality of life. And then you have these distributive teams, which is the future of work, is going to be, you don't have to be where you are. And just not traveling alone to work has been there's been a huge reduction in carbon output because you're not driving back and forth to work every day.
But where you come from, driving back and forth to work is a part of American lore, right? You come from a place where they made cars for a long time, and that was part of it. And just a few nights ago, President Trump was out there again talking about how they're going to take your cars away and your cows away, and you're not going to have ice cream and all this kind of stuff. There are people.
I would never be for that. I would just be on the
You're
record.
against taking away ice cream. There is lore out there that is a bit nonsensical when it comes to efficiency.
Yeah.
I mean, you're from a part of the country where you're going to have to convince people that everybody driving a big car on their own is not necessarily the future.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the best person in the race to call BS on him because I'm from there. He came to Ohio and said he was going to bring all these manufacturing jobs
Don't
back.
sell your home, he told me.
Don't sell your home. That was he was a few miles from my house, and he's saying that to our workers. And he said we're going to bring these steel mills back and we're going to open the coal mines back up. And I just think a person who's from there on a stage next to him saying, you are completely full of it. I've lived in this community for 46 years. My father-in-law was a steel worker for 40 years at Wheatland Tube, not far from, right over the PA border. My family worked in these mills. I mean, my mom's side's Italian. They all came here. They came to work in the mills. The next generation worked in the mills. And they were the last generation really to benefit from that work. And so he's not going to run that game on me. My argument is, what's the future of work? What are the future jobs? Don't be telling us, selling us nostalgia. Sell me the future, and I want to sell the future.
So talk to me about, I think you articulate very well what the future of work looks like. And we're in that no matter what. Whether this is a climate conversation or not, we're in the fourth industrial revolution.
Totally.
We are moving into a place where there will be robotics and there'll be AI. How do you get from here to there? Because we still have wounded Americans from the last time things changed, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned them, coal workers and manufacturing workers who trust nobody.
No.
They think everybody lied to them. So now you're going to tell them, we're making another shift. How do you sell the idea that that shift can be prosperous, that the future of work in America can be good in a green economy?
I think, one, you have to be very careful because there is no trust. And two, I think this is going to be a lot like '92. James Carville used to say with Bill Clinton, you got to explain it to him. You've got to explain the plan. And I think, that's kind of what we're doing here now is like, okay, I'm going to have a chief manufacturing officer. Part of it's trust too, and it could be like Tim Ryan's from Youngstown, Ohio. Like he gets what we're going through here.
He's seen unemployed steel workers. He's seen auto plants closed down.
Yeah.
All right, so let me ask you a different question. There's a whole, you could get the big three. You can get auto manufacturers and suppliers into this idea because their view of the world is I can bake it square or I can bake it round. If you tell me what the rules are going to be, as we've seen with emissions, they'll do it.
Right.
What do you do about oil companies? What do you do about fossil fuel companies? Are they at the table with you thinking about a plan? Or do you say, you guys knew this was happening. You knew what you were doing. Is this about accountability, saying, no, you don't actually get to plan the future? Or do you say, you have the intelligence, you've got all the brains, sit and help us plan it?
Well, I think you first and foremost say you're losing all your incentives to go down into the past, further and deeper into the past, locking us into a position where we can't reverse things. But then they have a lot of wealth that if you create the proper framework, they will see the opportunities of moving into some of these industries. And I would like to see us develop a tax code. And Dalio talks a lot about this and writes a lot about it, where you're talking about a double bottom line or a triple bottom line.
Right.
Again,
not just your profitability from your activity, but other things.
So Jamie Dimon and these guys came out, a few weeks ago and were saying it's not just about the shareholder, it's about the stakeholder. And that means the community. I mean, we see it in Youngstown. I mean, the factory closes, goodbye.
Yeah.
I mean, That's crazy. Like you use this community for profit for how long? You take General Motors example, they take money from the taxpayer. All the workers make huge sacrifices to keep the thing afloat, and then you decide you're going to close the factory down, done, and you say, well, you can go work in Toledo if you want, or you can go work in Flint, Michigan if you want. They're on strike now, right? And so last few days, I went from Youngstown to Parma, which is outside of Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, and Flint, and I stopped at all the picket lines. The stories of these people who drive home on the weekends because they're like me. They got a kid, 2 kids in high school. They got a 5-year-old. They're not going to uproot their whole family. They're literally driving like back and forth to Toledo from Youngstown once a week, and they're working 5 or 6 12-hour-a-day shifts, and then getting in a car and trying to go home so they can spend 1 or 2 nights with their kids. I mean, this is the sacrifice they're making for their families, and so for the company to just have blatant disregard for that, I think, is why there's so much distrust. So what's the plan for the future for those workers? I mean, to me, you got to explain it to them. You got to give them a reason. And if the fossil fuel industry loses their incentives and they can help us solve this problem, I think it's all hands on deck.
Let me talk to you about something else that happens in your area, fracking, which didn't used to happen, and there was a moment where that area was devastated economically, and then fracking brought some prosperity back. It also brought some earthquakes, apparently, and other dangers that we now are associating with this. What do you think of our extractive industries? How should we be thinking about this? You're not signed on to the Green New Deal. You don't believe that's the answer.
Well, I agree with most of it. I don't agree with like the job. I agree with a Green New Deal, but I don't agree with the job guarantee. I don't agree with universal basic income, which was all in there. But I think we need to go big on a Green New Deal.
So let's talk about the part of that deal, or Cory Booker's, or Bernie Sanders, which talks about carbon neutral by 2050. Do you think we can be there?
We have to be. I mean, I just, we have to be. I hope we're there before that, and I know that's a huge lift, and that's a good goal. And again, that's why I want to see financial incentives align with environmental incentives, because I think the quickest way to get there is if companies start making money. Now, you build that out with saying we want these to be union jobs. We want a double, triple bottom line where where your tax rate goes down, not like we did, everyone gets a tax cut, but your tax rate will actually go down if you're putting money into the worker's retirement. If you're giving the worker a fair wage, maybe it's not a union, but you're giving them a fair wage. Maybe they have good health care, good benefits, child care, whatever the case may be. Your rate goes down. So you're actually rewarding companies. See, we got to do everything we can to just steer it in another direction. And we got to use the tax code as a way to do that. And I think if we do that, double, triple bottom line stuff, I think we can get there a lot quicker.
Do you think, so what does that do? You are from a place that has extractive industries. Do we do away with those? Do you see a future where there's fracking where you're from?
I think natural gas has got to be the bridge.
But when does the bridge end? We usually get to the end of a bridge at some point.
Yeah, well, you better have done the work on the other side, and that's what has to be done. And we're not going to be able to power the country in 2 years on renewable. So there's got to be some way for us to go from natural gas. And natural gas has displaced coal. And that's been a net benefit for the environment. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There's still issues with it. There are a lot of jobs tied to it. I will tell you that on my way to the Pittsburgh airport, and this is kind of real politics, on my way to the Pittsburgh airport, there's a $5 billion natural gas, what they call a cracker plant, where they take the natural gas and they break it out into methane and butane and propane, so you light your grill. And so that plant is $5 billion. There's 6,000 to 7,000 union construction jobs building that. Every union hall in the region is empty, and these guys make between $80,000 and $120,000 a year. And 5 years ago, everyone was saying how great natural gas was.
Right.
So and then there's going to be another one built in Ohio. And these are from Ohio and Pennsylvania, Western PA union people. So saying we are going to immediately ban fracking, they will hear, you want to take my job.
Correct. That's exactly
so
what
the
they
absolute worst thing for the environment is Donald Trump to be president for 4 more years. You want to talk about a disaster for the environment? That's a disaster. So we've got to just be careful. I'm a practical guy from Ohio. I'm just saying, like, these people need to vote for us. And if our pitch is it's got to be gone now, not you're going to build this, you're going to build that, and we're going to set up these electric vehicle plants, and you're going to be retrofitting old plants, and there's going to be a lot of work ahead for you guys as you're moving forward. To me, that's the way to go, and I think we use that as a bridge, and we build as quickly as we possibly can out the renewable economy.
So let's talk about coal. There's coal in your state as well, and these coal workers are mad. They're mad at everybody, but they're mad at people who they feel let them down. So now people, as you said, are not going to be as ready to believe that this is the future. What do you think happens to non-manufacturing workers? Because you seem to have a plan for manufacturing workers. What do you have for those people in extractive industries? Is it a government-led initiative? Is it private sector-led? How do you get those people who may, in the course of 5 or 10 years, be losing their jobs in extractive industries to feel productive? Because some of them are 35 years old or 40 years old.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to see that their lives are over.
No. And I know these guys. I mean, I know these workers, men and women, I mean, mostly men, obviously, but
if you're sitting with them, what do you tell them? What do you tell them the future looks like?
Well, first, if I can paint a picture, like, these are the best jobs in the state that they have, or in the community. They make $100,000 a year in Western West Virginia. They have a truck, they have a pool, they have a house. They go on vacation. They go hunting with their kids. They have a good life. Their job sucks. Like, nobody wants to go into a coal mine, but they're providing for their family. And so everyone needs to say, okay, that's who we're talking to there. Now you're going to come in and you're going to say you're going to get retrained.
And I'm going to say, why do I need to be retrained?
I'm going to get retrained for what? So I think the best way to start connecting with them is you've got to have these public work, these infrastructure projects. I think as we're talking about manufacturing, you also need a very robust infrastructure bill that looks a lot like what China does. I mean,
a federal bill.
Federal bill with lots of money invested into it that is getting its way into these local communities. So these workers can transition out into the building and construction trades. And then let's make the infrastructure bill more of a long-term, maybe we re-up, but we have these long-term projects where people are going to be able to work. And then I don't think we should talk about retraining. I think we should talk about how do we get the investment. I was talking about the manufacturing. How do you drive it in the old coal country so that people can be building windmills? But you can't ask somebody to give up their job making $100,000 a year to have a job making $40,000 a year putting a windmill together. It's just not going to work. They're not going to support the candidate that's saying that. You've got to have a better plan for them. And like I said, the worst thing we could do for the environment is have Donald Trump in there for 4 more years.
But what if it's you? What if it's President Tim Ryan on January 21st, 2021, and I sit here and say, yeah, you got some good ideas about this.
Yeah.
What actually happens to that $120,000 a year earning worker? What are we doing? Are we... What physically happens? And I'm only using that as an example because there are lots of people in this country who make a lot of money off of work that is bad for the environment.
Yeah.
So it might be a coal worker in Ohio or Western West Virginia. It might be a gas worker in Oklahoma. It might be an oil worker in Texas. But there are people who are employed in this world who need to see an alternative future, right?
Yeah.
They can't just say the alternative future is not this. It needs to look like this.
Correct.
Do you have a sense of what those industries become?
Well,
is it just windmills? Is it just...
Well, hard to tell. I think anybody that says they know what the economy is going to look like in 10 years, they're lying because it's just changing too quickly. But I would just say that it's got to be something over time. And we've got to build the green economy to where it pays, which I talk a lot about doubling union membership in the United States. I think these jobs have got to be good, solid, union, middle-class jobs, because they're not going to go from a good, solid union, middle-class job to a job that doesn't pay. And so, but coal, for example, they're continuing to get displaced. I mean, we're down 30,000 coal jobs in the last 10 years. So it's moving in that direction.
It's been almost 100 years of decline in the coal industry, to be fair. It's not even a recent phenomenon.
And steel, too. I mean, we had a $1 billion steel mill investment in Youngstown, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And it added hundreds of jobs.
Right.
You know, where if you would have spent $1 billion 40, 50 years ago, you'd probably employed 10,000 people.
Right.
And so these investments are into robotics, they're into, you know, machine learning and all that stuff. So that's going to continue to decline. I have a bill, for example, that if you lose your job in that industry, you get some wage insurance for a while you get retrained, so you don't have a complete drop off. You can keep some of your wage. But again, it's going to have to be, we are creating jobs in the industries that are growing like crazy.
You're talking about 30 million electric cars on the road by 2030. Do you see that completely replacing all of our work in making cars in America? In other words, do you think we can have a one-to-one switch over to electric vehicles or greater?
Yeah, I mean, you want to do it as quickly as possible. Again, what can you get through Congress? Are the incentives there? Can we dramatically expand the tax credits for people to be able to afford them? What's it going to take if you get into the double, triple bottom line for the car industry? Does it make more sense for them to really ramp up production? How do we steer it to communities, you know, that lost, as we said? So it's hard to tell, but I'm all about setting these ambitious goals, because like FDR, he was setting these obnoxious goals. People thought he was insane. And we would blow right past them.
But he painted it as a national imperative in which you could participate, as opposed to a national sacrifice in which you would suffer.
Right.
Right. The framing of it is interesting.
Totally. And that's why I think the double bottom line, triple bottom line, and the tax code is a heck of a lot better to get people going. And making sure the workers are cut in on the deal. To me, that's how it's got to go.
Let's open it up to the students. I want to go to USC. We can see them on the monitor. Go ahead. Tell us who you are and ask your question.
Hi, Congressman Meyer. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Dan Toomey. I'm a senior here at the University of Southern California. I study journalism. And my question to you is, you mentioned earlier that 4 more years of Trump would be a disaster. But we can't assume that a Democrat will defeat President Trump in 2020. That doesn't mean, though, that the fight against the climate crisis has to end. Now, if Trump is reelected, how do we not abandon efforts for investing in alternative energy sources and cutting carbon emissions moving forward?
I've got a mindset that I will not allow myself to think about Donald Trump being president in 2020. But again, it's going to be a 4-year slog. I think the one thing that President Trump has taught us is that just how powerful the presidency is. Like, he's distractor in chief, right? But he flashes all these lights, and we got to look. You got to look. You're a reporter. You're on TV every day. You got to look at it. What's he saying? He's the most powerful guy in the world. What, are we going to not pay attention? And so that has slowed down so much progress. Then he has these executive orders that he can continue to pass and or reverse of things that President Obama did, the Clean Power Plan and all of these things. Like, you have a lot of power, and so it's going to slow things down dramatically. You hope the private sector continues to move in that direction. You hope, you know, these investment groups like Full Cycle and others keep coming online to make these investments because the finances make sense. But there's no guarantee. So, you know.
So is it your view that the president and the presidency and the administration is key to ultimate success in making a shift into an economy that aggressively fights the effects of climate change?
I think it will happen in time, but it may be too late.
Okay.
Because the president is then, if you're not on the program throwing kerosene on it, you're part of the problem.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Linnea Petropoulos. I'm a freshman here at Georgetown studying environmental biology and government. I'm also in GU Fossil Free. A lot of universities like Georgetown are stalling on divesting from fossil fuels. What do you think about the divestment movement, and do you think institutions of higher education have a responsibility to stop lending credibility to the fossil fuel industry by divesting?
I think it can be one tool. Every university's got to make that decision on their own. This is a problem with a lot of industries of the money that they give to universities. We see this a lot in agriculture. Why haven't we moved to regenerative agriculture? Because the monopolies in the ag industry are donating a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, to the universities, get them on the hook, and then the ag schools in those universities teach the old line industrial agriculture. So each university is going to have to make its own decision. And like I said, like that person working at that cracker plant is not a bad human being. Natural gas is a bridge. I have a different opinion about oil and coal, but I think natural gas is a bridge, and we need to move in that direction. But I think institutions of higher learning, if they have an opportunity to take their robust portfolios and their endowments and invest that instead into renewables, I think that's a great thing, because that's, if the government's not going to move in that direction, maybe we need the leadership of some of these institutions. That can help speed it up, especially, you know, per the last question, if Trump is still president, we're really going to have to rely on some of these private endowments to help maybe move the needle.
Let's go to Iowa State University.
Iowa State.
Hi,
I have a question.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel Harwood. I'm a freshman
he
in
doesn't care
political
about me.
science. As president, what would you do to incentivize sustainable farming practices?
This is a great question. Thank you. And the head coach at Iowa State football is from Ohio, just so you know, Matt Campbell. So when you guys are winning football games. Regenerative and sustainable farming has actually become one of my favorite, absolute favorite things to talk about, because this politically is doable. And we saw it with this relationship. Those of you who don't know, that there were some regenerative farmers and ranchers who got together with the Sunrise Movement around using agriculture as a huge opportunity to reverse climate change. So I want to set up, a Secretary of Agriculture who really believes in moving to regenerative agriculture. I want to have robust funding that goes out to our branch campuses, our ag extensions. In places like Ohio, you have these agriculture extension branches that are tied to the land-grant college. I want to have teams, this is based off of a nonprofit that already exists, but I want to have teams of 4 or 5 people, 4 or 5 teams per state, that actually go out and help these farmers try to learn about regenerative agriculture. They don't know how to do it, and they don't know how to get off the hook of the subsidies, and you see it happening now with President Trump. He's throwing money at them. They don't want that. They can become very profitable if they learn how to do it. And if we have an aggressive plan that comes out of the USDA and our land-grant colleges to really move them in this direction, like I was saying to the other question, these land-grant colleges are getting all this money from big ag. So of course they're going to teach you the agriculture technique that uses the most pesticides, right, and the most fertilizer, of course. So we've got to move away from that. So we have to fund those teams in place through the government and get them teaching others, other farmers, on how to do that. And like I said, they're making money, and I think this is a way to do it. And I think the government can build incentives in, again, could be double bottom line, triple bottom line stuff, could be some investments in a transition. So if a farmer made a bunch of investments into the industrial ag approach 2 years ago, and now we're asking them to do this, we should help them take care of that obligation that they have. And I don't know exactly how we do that. We work it through the committee process. But I think building these teams out and really penetrating the culture of teaching people how to do this and using farmers who are making money. Ali, these guys are making money. I was just watching a video of a person, Gabe Brown in North Dakota. He's making $950 an acre for a certain crop because he's not using any pesticides. And he's sequestering carbon. And he told me, he planted on time this past year. Everyone else was flooded out around him. He planted on time. Why? Because his soil was rich in organic material. He's been doing it for years. It held the water. He went out and planted his crop.
All right. Go ahead.
Hi, Congressman.
Hi.
My name's Holly Thompson. I am a sophomore environmental studies major at Catholic University in D.C. My question is that the United States only contributes 15% of the pollution in the atmosphere. So how do you plan to work with other countries and urge them to take action, as well as when countries like China are focused on profits?
That's the question. That's a great question. It really is. I mean, it just shows how complicated our relationship is with China, because we can't do this without them. And so, you know, we've got to take a firm stance on some of the trade issues, which I am for that concept. I'm not for dragging it out for 2 years and dragging everybody through the mud and not having a deal. But it's going to take a lot of work, and I think President Obama really worked hard to try to lay some of the groundwork. I will try to continue the work of President Obama in that regard. You got to build these relationships, and again, if we, which we have done in so many different ways, in the United States, we create industries. And then other countries come over here and they learn about it. You know, I mean, like the Japanese did, and then they, with the car industry, then they did a better job than us for a long time. So we've got to be the country that's always doing the best, most innovative thing. Electric vehicles, wind, solar. We'll drive the cost down, it'll become profitable, everyone else will start doing it. So we've got to use our role and responsibility. This is why, you know, American exceptionalism is not a bad idea, because we have a responsibility, because we've got a very powerful economy, we've got a lot of really smart people, we're risk takers in our DNA because, you know, of our immigration policies and everything else. We've got the magic sauce here if we align everything properly. But then China will come along. If they see us making money off it, they'll steal our intellectual property and go start their own companies.
China makes a government-level commitment to all of these things.
Yeah.
Right? So that is a bit of a difference. The example of solar power in the United States, or, you know, doing things in solar, where we just didn't agree to back companies the way China does. How do we influence these industries if we're not leading in a lot of them? Because China has taken the lead in industries that most people thought America was a leader in or should have been a leader in.
Yeah.
As it relates to energy, as it relates to 5G, as it relates to a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's a mindset shift for us.
Yeah. I think competitiveness has got to be a major theme for the Democrats. How are we going to be competitive with China, primarily? Russia's messing with us defense-wise, but economically, it's China. And if you look at this is why I talk about an industrial policy, I talk about a chief manufacturing officer. We need a plan. China has a 100-year plan, 70-year plan, 50-year plan, 30-year plan, 20-year plan. We live in a 24-hour news cycle. And so what I want us to do is have a long-term plan that's interconnected. I mean, you see the farming thing plays into a healthcare piece that we're not talking about here, getting healthy food to our kids and all the rest. And so how do we get that plan together so we can actually exercise that over the years? Now look at China, One Belt, One Road initiative, where they're building infrastructure projects from northeast China. I saw a rail line from northeast China all the way to Rotterdam. They're building ports in the Middle East, Northern Africa, around India, and you know, they're gas lines, oil lines, like it's huge. It's a huge infrastructure project. The old Silk Road. And what's our...
Times 10, probably. I mean,
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, what's our plan on that? You know, they have this...
But we're in a deficit right now when it comes to leadership on things like that in the world, right? You'd have to dig us out of a hole just to get us to zero.
Totally.
Where China is leading on this front.
They're leading. 50 to 60% of the electric vehicle market, 60% of the solar market, because they intentionally moved in that direction. Right. Huge infrastructure projects. Their Make It in China 2025 plan, where they want to be the leader in the top 10 industries in the world. Artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, aerospace, I mean, just go right down the line. They have a plan on how they're going to do it. I want us to have a plan on all these industries through the chief manufacturing officer, which would do most of them, and have these industrial policies put in place, and then back that with the infrastructure bill. that is building out the infrastructure that we're going to need for all of that. That's how you do it. And it's not this bullshit, like centralized plan. Oh, the government's going to do everything. You know, that kind of stuff that we hear all the time. It's like, no, the government has a responsibility to organize 330 plus million people to create some projects that are going to position us in a way that we would never be able to be positioned if we cut taxes for the rich and hope things work out. Because that's the world we've been living in since 1980. And how's that working out for us? Not very good. I mean, you know, the average wages are stagnant. 75% of the people in the country still living paycheck to paycheck. 40 to 50% of the people can't withstand a $400 emergency. How's this whole cut taxes for the rich working out? I'm for an industrial policy. I've talked a lot about private sector, business, investment, venture capital, all a part of the program. How do we organize that and push in one direction? To me, that's the job of the president.
Let's go to the University of New Hampshire. Go ahead.
Right now? Oh. Hi, my name is Ali Reyes. I'm a freshman at the University of New Hampshire. My question for you is that considering that 70% of global greenhouse emissions, that 100 companies are responsible, that just 100 companies are responsible for 70% of global greenhouse emissions, what is your plan to hold corporate America accountable for their role in climate change?
I don't understand.
100 companies are responsible for 70% of carbon output. What's your plan to hold American companies accountable for their responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, to me, ultimately, the way you beat them is you move off of what they're doing. You increase demand for something else. Again, we're talking about natural gas as a bridge to where we need to be. And so, you know, at some point, we're working with them to get us from where we are to where we need to be. If they have knowingly and intentionally contributed to this stuff, I'm all for the kind of lawsuits that are out there right now for opiates. We saw it with cigarettes. I'm all for holding them responsible, knowingly contributing to climate change. I think that's entirely appropriate. But in the meantime, we've got to spend a lot of our energy building that alternative economy.
Do you deal with a lot of people who have been subject to a decades-long misinformation campaign? I mean, do you still come across a lot of people who don't really believe this is a thing?
Not really.
Good.
Do you?
I don't actually, but I think they just don't. They don't come for me.
Yeah, I think they're.
I'm not running for president, so.
I really don't. I mean, you know, even people back home who were slow to maybe come around know something's happening. They don't even. I don't know if they know it's man-made or something, but they know it's happening. Here's the interesting thing, to go back to regenerative agriculture real quick, that you have farmers, this is why I think we've got to move on these politically viable things. You have farmers who are super into regenerative agriculture, have converted their farms over, who don't think that climate change is caused by man. Now, I do, and you do.
But it doesn't matter.
But it doesn't matter. They want to sequester carbon.
Right.
So, and they want to use less pesticides on our food, and they want to use less nitrogen, which means less algae bloom. So I'm thinking, holy cow, we got a political coalition here that can actually move a significant piece of legislation around moving to regenerative agriculture with Republicans, libertarians, and liberals.
Right.
I think that's
so however
not a
you
bad
got
idea.
there, it doesn't matter to
Who
you
cares?
as long as we're
I don't
fixing
care.
the problem.
Yeah, I don't care.
Go ahead, sir.
Representative Ryan, my name is Dominic DeRamo. I'm a freshman here at Georgetown studying government, and I was born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio.
I was going to say DeRamo, it's a local name, yeah.
So, as someone who currently represents blue-collar workers, how would you, as president, ensure that companies and manufacturers will not retaliate against their workers because of imposed environmental regulations?
It's a very, very interesting and very good question, right? Because we're talking about accountability for companies and industries, but workers get affected by this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is the union, right? If you're in a union, you have the power of the group to push back against any kind of punishment that may be out there against the workers. I think a strong Department of Labor, Secretary of Labor, who is going to have rules and regulations that will actually be enforced to protect workers, that shouldn't be retaliated against for any reason like the ones you cited. I think that's probably the two best ways to do it. The law is the way to do it. Thank you.
You don't, you're not, as you said, you support a lot of the goals embodied in the Green New Deal, but you don't actually support that deal for particular reasons. What you don't have on your website is sort of an equivalent robust plan. So when somebody wants to think of Tim Ryan, whose industrial policy makes a lot of sense and manufacturing policy makes a lot of sense, but they want to say, is this my guy if climate's my #1 concern? Because for a lot of Americans, it's certainly up there.
Yeah.
How do we know that's you? Because it sounds like you're on the right side of the issue,
yeah.
but some of your opponents have a much more detailed line-by-line plan about everything they're going to do.
Yeah, I talk about this everywhere I go. I mean, I talk about, we got to build our way out of it, we've got to grow our way out of it, we've got to innovate our way out of it. That's how we achieve this goal. And I think you do it through all the things we've said here today, and that's my plan. We build out the regenerative agriculture, we build out with a manufacturing officer the new economy, and we invest into things like I have a bill coming out, and I literally started an energy incubator in one of my towns that's focused on innovating technologies around smart grids and different things. I want to create a national network of incubators. A lot of them would be focused on energy. So we innovate our way and put those incubators in small and mid-sized communities that need economic development. Brookings came out with a study a few years back that said companies that move out of business incubators locate within 5 miles of the incubator.
Right.
So if we want to grow innovative companies in industrial areas or areas that have been left behind, talked about investment in broadband in rural America and all that stuff about reducing subsidies and investing in those so that they can accept these kind of companies. So innovate, build, grow. That's how we get out of this thing. That's the plan.
Let's go to Iowa State University. Go ahead.
That's the plan.
Let's go. Hello, my name is Elias Farley. I was wondering who you personally rely on most when you're making decisions about your stance on climate policy.
I'm a Paul Hawken devotee, and his book Drawdown has been very influential. I think it's Will McDonough. He wrote a book called The Upcycle a few years back, which is this whole other revolution that's happening around materials. How do we
circular economy?
A circular economy.
Yeah.
How do we continue to make things that can be remade into something else?
Yeah.
So
he worked on the Ford Rouge plant where they changed that from, I think, one of the oldest auto factories in the country into a thing that is able to regenerate, use its own water and use its own power again. It's a whole new, it's like regenerative farming. It's a whole area that we can gain in.
See, this is why I'm optimistic, because underneath all of the craziness that's happening, there's like this new economy that's just like ready to bust out of, just ready to go. And all of you going into those new jobs, and all we need is like a president that just like moves this scab, this crust off the top, and it can blossom. And all we need to do as governments make our investments, try to steer some of it to these communities that have been left behind, and this thing can go. I mean, it's ready to go. I see it everywhere, and that's what I like. It's like, what are you going to do? What I say is, I'm going to do what they're doing over there. I'm going to do what Gabe Brown's doing over there. This is already happening here.
Right.
In Flint, Michigan, there's an incubator that started. In Youngstown, we have one of the best business software incubators. We have an energy incubator. We have an additive manufacturing center that's doing amazing stuff around 3D printing. It's ready to bust. We just need a federal government that actually throws gas on it, it used to, and make these investments. And it's small amounts of money. It's not like we got to get crazy. It's just energize things, catalyze things.
Hello, Congressman Ryan.
Hi.
My name is Clayton Canal. I'm in the McDonough School of Business here, freshman, probably studying finance. My question is...
But not sure, just yet.
Yeah, not yet. My question is, what effect do you feel that overpopulation has with global warming, and should we be doing anything to combat this?
It's about resources. So yeah, I mean, I think we should be active again with international agencies within the State Department. Now the President wants to cut the State Department budget dramatically. We need to be involved in the United Nations family planning efforts around the world. I think we need to continue to do that. It's an important approach that we need to continue to make. Yeah.
What's your sense of the best message you can have for people about what the future looks like under your plan for climate change? What does 2050 look like to you? And I ask you this because we started this conversation talking about your kids.
Yeah.
Right? You worry because they worry.
Yep.
If you get this all right, do you believe we can halt or at least, stick to within guidelines on our temperature increase on the globe? Do you think we can? What impact do you think we can have?
I think we can reverse it by 2050. I think we.
That's ambitious because there are a lot of people who live in this world who say,
if we get it right. If we don't, it's like you start a game and you're like, we're going to win, right? And then like you're 3/4 in and you're down 4 touchdowns. Like, it's going to be hard to win. I think we're still in a position where we can do it. I think what we're seeing from the business community, moving away from the strictly shareholder approach, showing signs of wanting to participate in some of these bigger goals, having guys like Ray Dalio talk about the importance of these things, I think is really important. And so I think we could have a new economy up and running by then. I think we can be building electric vehicles and whatever the next thing is, fuel cells. I mean, who knows where we can be if we're putting the resources in. I think we can clean the oceans, and there's a lot of opportunities for taking garbage and using the gas that comes out of a lot of the plastics and recycling things. We can move. We're teaching our kids in schools things like the upcycle on how to start really driving this material revolution. I think it's also going to be important for us to really deal with our kids in our schools today too. So we make sure we have kids coming out of our schools that we have vocational training. We have a mental health counselor in every school. We have social and emotional learning in schools. We deal with trauma that kids are coming to school with and the mental health issues so that they are performing at their best. I talk a lot about the food system. Like, the food system is completely broken. 75% of our healthcare costs are chronic diseases that are largely preventable. So how do we use food as medicine to reverse chronic disease? Like, what's that have to do with the environment? Well, we're spending $3.5 trillion every year on chronic diseases that are largely preventable.
Which can be spent elsewhere.
That could be spent. It's a waste of money.
Yeah.
And so how do we build these systems that we're healthy, we've dealt with the trauma, we're healing ourselves, we're healing the economy, we're trying to reform our healthcare system so that we can heal the planet around us. If we're not healthy, we're not going to be able to do it. And so we need vibrant, energetic, creative people going into creating that economy, which is you. Like, we can set this up, but ultimately you get the torch with Bella and Mason and Brady. And hopefully I can be a president that we hit the reset button, which would be the goal.
Sir.
My name is Carl Rode. I am both a student at the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington and a hopeful future congressman.
All right.
Excellent.
That's great. You guys let a George Washington guy in here? What's the matter with you?
I've noticed that you want to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, but experts say even those countries that have signed up are not working fast enough to meet their requirements for the accords, including France itself. As president, will you use your position to push other countries to meet their deadlines and even go further than the Paris Accords require?
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. But the reality of it is you have to show them how moving in this direction becomes profitable. So the French companies can make money off of doing, wow, the American companies are making all this money. How do we compete with them? And you'll shift the economy. And so you can talk to them about it, but the profit motive is a very, very powerful thing. And I want us to be the leaders in the world in these industries and show the world how this works. Cut the workers in on the deal so they're happy and building this new world with us. And that'll move France, that'll move China, that'll move everybody else.
Thank you for your question.
Thanks.
Congressman, thank you for your time
Thank you.
today. We've blown by through our time with some Fantastic questions from our students here and across the country. And I appreciate the thought that you've put into this. And regardless of the current topic on climate, we really don't have industrial policy in this country, and that is something that your 46 years in Ohio has informed you well about, and I appreciate you sharing that.
If I could just say one last thing for 30 seconds, I really mean it when I say to you, we've got to get out of the left-right divide. Like, just think, I was watching Ken Burns' Vietnam documentary, which is absolutely phenomenal, totally recommend it to anybody. But I was listening to that and I was watching that and I just thought, we've been stuck in this country since Vietnam. And when people were saying a few weeks back, America, love it or leave it, like, I'm watching this documentary, and that we've been saying that for a long time, but that was in the Vietnam documentary. It was like, America, love it or leave it. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, we're still having these fights? Like, this left-right thing is just broken. We've got to get past it, and you have got to help us. It can't be like, you know, are you socialist? Are you liberal? Are you moderate? Are you conservative? Like, what are you on the political spectrum? I'm like, I'm for solving problems. I'm for passing regenerative agriculture because we can get a group of people who can actually get that passed. I'm for social and emotional learning because Brookings Institute supports it, and so does American Enterprise Institute. Like, we've got to heal. We've got to move forward, and if we're going to sit around and spend the next 40 years arguing like we have the last 40 years, we're going nowhere. We got to respect each other. We got to listen to each other. You need the free market. It needs to be regulated. You know, it's got to have balance in it, but we need the government. And it can do good things if we agree to work together to make it work. And we sit down and we do local projects back home. I'm very involved in economic development. Chamber of Commerce, Port Authority, local economic development agencies, Youngstown State or Akron University's there, or Kent State, one of the local universities there. No one sits around and says, hey, you Democrat or Republican? It's like, no, we got a project that's going to mean jobs, we're going to renovate a YMCA, whatever it is. And we do it. And so that's my thing. I may never see you again the rest of my life. You may never see me again. But know that I hope you see me a lot on TV every single day. I won't tweet as much, I promise, but it's up to us to change the conversation, and you're obviously a very important part of that.
America will be better for seeing a lot of you, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will be back again in 15 minutes with former HUD Secretary Julian Castro for our final discussion of the day. This thing is not over. We have another day tomorrow, but thank you for your continued participation and your energy. I will see you in 15 minutes.